December 8, 1942. Luftwaffe Forward Base Taganrog. Hauptmann Klaus Müller paced the officers' briefing room, his face illuminated by the dim glow of tactical maps spread across the wooden table. Outside, mechanics worked frantically to repair aircraft that had returned with damaged engines and cracked windscreens, not from Soviet fire, but from night landings forced by exhaustion. 3 nights of interrupted operations had left the Luftwaffe contingent sleep-deprived and irritable. Supply depots in sectors G4 and H2 had reported unexplained explosions. Ammunition trains scheduled to reinforce the Stalingrad front had arrived with critical shortages. Miller had called this emergency assessment to determine the cause of these mysterious nighttime disruptions. "Gentlemen, intelligence reports that our night operations are being hampered by women," Miller announced, pausing for effect before continuing. "Yes, women. Soviet female pilots flying agricultural crop dusters." The room erupted in laughter. "These so-called night witches are supposedly dropping bombs from wooden biplanes built in 1928. Oberst Werner Schmidt raised his glass. "To the Soviet High Command who sends women to do men's work," he toasted. "They must truly be desperate." Another officer chimed in. "How many handkerchiefs can these girls pack alongside their bombs?" More laughter followed. Miller tapped his pointer on the map with confident finality. "These primitive aircraft will be eliminated within the month. They're flying coffins, not bombers." What Hauptmann Miller didn't know was that at that precise moment, Nadezhda Popova was already airborne, flying her 317th mission of what would eventually total 852 combat sorties. The 21-year-old pilot from Shabanovka had already dropped over 9 tons of the eventual 23 tons of bombs she would release on German forces. While Luftwaffe officers mocked her wooden aircraft, Popova had survived 42 bullet holes in her aircraft during just one mission the previous week. Her squadron had developed night tactics that made them virtually untouchable. Less than 27 hours after Muller's dismissive briefing, his personal staff car would be destroyed in a precision night raid, the wooden fragments of a homemade delayed fuse bomb found embedded in the wreckage. The calling card of a night witch. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, had evolved through brutal lessons learned in the skies over Britain and the Soviet Union. After losing 137 pilots to cockpit freezing deaths in early Russian winter operations, the Luftwaffe had mandated enclosed heated cockpits. Following 23 mid-air collisions over the Eastern Front in 1941, radio coordination became standard procedure. When analysis revealed that 30% of pilot deaths could have been prevented with proper emergency egress, parachutes became mandatory equipment. Most critically, after documenting the slaughter of slow reconnaissance aircraft, German engineers established a minimum operational speed requirement of 180 mph for any aircraft expected to survive Soviet airspace. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter embodied these hard-earned requirements. 300 mph top speed, crew of 4 with specialized night vision training, few G-220 Liechtenstein radar systems, and twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower. Between 1940 and 1942, these aircraft had destroyed 357 British bombers, providing statistical validation of German air superiority doctrine. Their confidence wasn't mere arrogance. It was backed by technological supremacy and combat success. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant. On October 3, 1942, during her 278th mission, she approached the Mozdok rail yard carrying 400 pounds of fragmentation bombs. Flying without radio in an open cockpit at -30 degrees Celsius, she navigated solely by memorized landmarks and stars. No parachute adorned her back. At her operational altitude of 1,200 feet, there was insufficient height to deploy one anyway. Her Po-2 biplane cruised at 94 mph, almost half the German established minimum survival speed. Yet she successfully destroyed an ammunition transport, slipping between searchlight beams by cutting her engine and gliding silently to her target. This was Mission 278 of what would eventually become 852 successful sorties. When German intelligence officers reviewed the damage reports, they dismissed it as lucky shots from partisan artillery, refusing to believe aircraft could operate effectively in such conditions. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established. The Polikarpov PO-2 biplane was, by any reasonable assessment, a flying anachronism. Constructed of pine frames covered with percal fabric, it was essentially flying kindling, or plywood with wings, as German pilots mockingly called it. The open cockpit subjected pilots to brutal conditions. -40-degree winds froze exposed skin within minutes, caused severe frostbite on extremities, and formed ice crystals on eyelashes that had to be periodically broken away to maintain vision. Equipment considered absolutely essential by the Luftwaffe was entirely absent. No radios meant pilots communicated exclusively through hand signals illuminated by flashlights. No parachutes saved weight for additional bombs. No armor plating left pilots completely exposed to ground fire. The specifications comparison was laughable. Maximum speed of 94 mph versus the Ju-88's 300 mph. A single M11 engine producing 100 horsepower against the Junkers 2400, an airframe designed in 1928, often older than the women flying it. Perhaps most insulting to German sensibilities was the cost differential. Each PO2 required approximately $5,000 in 3 weeks to produce, while a Ju-88 demanded $80,000 in 3 months. The absurdity reached its peak in the weapons system. Bombs were literally dropped by hand, with navigators pulling pins and releasing them over the side of the aircraft. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into advantages. During her 452nd mission in January 1943, her aircraft took direct fire from a German anti-aircraft position. 27 bullets penetrated her aircraft's fabric covering, including one that passed through the sleeve of her flight jacket without breaking skin. Had she been flying a metal aircraft, that same bullet would have ricocheted within the cockpit until finding flesh. Instead, it punched clean holes through canvas and continued its trajectory. After landing with the damaged aircraft, Popova personally patched the holes with spare fabric and glue, returning to the air 3 hours later for another mission. The Germans designed their aircraft to withstand punishment, she later explained to new squadron members. We designed our tactics so punishment never finds us. Their metal coffins protect them from bullets. Our wooden ghosts ensure bullets never reach us. By exploiting the PO2's small size and maneuverability, Popova could fly beneath radar coverage and between searchlight patterns that would have instantly revealed larger aircraft. This advantage would prove instrumental in helping her reach the remarkable total of 852 combat missions. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment dated November 22, 1942, concluded, "The Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents a desperate measure indicating severe pilot shortages and declining manufacturing capacity. The wooden construction and primitive equipment render these aircraft extremely vulnerable to both weather conditions and enemy fire. The laws of physics remain immutable. Superior speed, metal construction, and modern equipment will always defeat slow, wooden, obsolete platforms in combat conditions. We predict these operations will cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. The calculated advantages of our night fighter force are definitive: a 3.1 speed ratio, 24.1 horsepower differential, and 15.1 cost efficiency factor. We assess these nuisance raids as having temporary morale impact only through sleep disruption, presenting no serious operational threat to Luftwaffe or Wehrmacht operations. Recommendation: monitor but do not prioritize special countermeasures beyond current protocols." This assessment carried the full authority of Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. The night following this assessment, she led a 3-aircraft formation that destroyed a fuel depot near Rostov, igniting 70,000 liters of aviation fuel destined for Stalingrad operations. By this point, she had conducted over 500 missions, rapidly approaching the 852, that would eventually make her one of the most decorated pilots in Soviet aviation history. The 23 tons of bombs she would ultimately deliver created disproportionate damage by targeting precise vulnerabilities rather than creating general destruction. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses of critical supplies that directly contradicted the assessment of minimal operational threat. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their logic seemed sound. Ju-88 fighters traveling at $300 mph versus PO2 biplanes at 94 mph created a 3.2x speed advantage. This should have meant easy interception and destruction of the slower aircraft. What they critically overlooked was that interception requires matching speed, not just exceeding it. The aerodynamic paradox lay in the stall speeds, the minimum airspeed at which an aircraft can maintain lift. The heavier Ju-88, with its greater wing loading, stalled at approximately 120 km/h. Dropping below this speed caused catastrophic lift loss and potential crashes. The lightweight POW, by contrast, operated comfortably at 80 mph and could maintain controlled flight in a glide at 60 mph with engine power reduced. This created an impossible scenario. German pilots had to either fly past their targets too quickly to engage effectively, or slow to speeds that put their own aircraft at risk of stalling. There was no middle ground. This paradox was documented in a specific failed intercept on September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, an experienced night fighter pilot with 11 confirmed kills, reduced speed to 130 mph while pursuing a Soviet biplane. The Soviet pilot, recognizing the German aircraft, immediately throttled back to a 70 mph glide. Schmidt's aircraft began showing stall warnings, forcing him to abort the intercept. His after-action report stated simply, "Target speed below minimum engagement threshold." Understanding this, physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable. During her 621st mission in April 1943, she detected the approach of a German night fighter by the distinctive engine sound. Immediately reducing power and descending to treetop level, she maintained a steady 75 mph. The German Ju-88 made 3 passes, each time overshooting her position, and forced to circle widely to attempt another approach. On the final attempt, the German pilot reduced speed dangerously, his aircraft wings visibly wobbling as he approached stall speed, before being forced to apply full power or risk crashing. Popova completed her bombing run and returned to base without further incident. This tactic, repeated across her 852 missions, proved the POW's slowness was its greatest weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed. And Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. The Luftwaffe had optimized their fighter force for intercepting fast Soviet bombers like the Il-4 and Pe-2, which typically operated at speeds exceeding 250 mph. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 night fighters were designed with pursuit in mind, not low-speed matching. The fundamental laws of flight dictated that their heavier airframes required higher speeds to maintain lift. At their standard cruising speed of 300 mph, overshooting a slow-moving target became inevitable. Even reducing speed to 150 mph brought these aircraft dangerously close to their stall threshold of 120 mph, where control surfaces began losing effectiveness and wings generated insufficient lift. The PO-2, meanwhile, operated comfortably at 80 mph and could maintain controlled flight while gliding at 60 mph, creating an untouchable zone. German pilots had spent hundreds of training hours perfecting high-speed pursuit techniques, not precision slow-speed engagement. At speed differentials exceeding 200 mph, their weapons acquisition window compressed to 2 to 3 seconds, insufficient time to achieve accurate targeting. On February 22, 1943, during her 524th mission, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage while targeting a German fuel depot near Krasnodar. She detected a Bf-110 night fighter by its distinctive twin-engine sound approaching from the west. Her immediate response was to throttle back to minimum power, reducing her airspeed to approximately 65 mph and descending to just 800 feet above the ground. The German fighter made 4 separate passes, overshooting her position each time. On the 3rd attempt, the pilot slowed dangerously, his aircraft's wings visibly wobbling as he approached stall speed, before being forced to accelerate again. Each pass gave Popova time to adjust her course toward the target. Between the fighter's attempts, she completed her bombing run, destroying 2 fuel tanks while the German pilot burned precious fuel attempting interception. By this point, Mission 524 of her eventual 852, Popova had developed such confidence in this tactic that she would sometimes deliberately make herself visible to lure fighters into the frustrating pursuit. Her after-action report noted simply, "Enemy fighter engaged, unable to match speed, target destroyed." The German pilot reported, Target evasion successful due to insufficient minimum speed capability. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO2's greatest vulnerability, its canvas and wood construction. The physics of bullet impact created an unexpected paradox. When bullets struck a metal aircraft, they would penetrate the aluminum skin, creating shrapnel, then ricochet inside the fuselage until striking vital components, fuel lines, hydraulics, control cables, or crew members. German ammunition had been specifically designed for metal targets, explosive rounds, incendiary tracers, and armor-piercing bullets that wasted energy penetrating non-existent armor. When these same rounds hit a canvas aircraft, they simply passed through the fabric, exited the other side, and continued their trajectory without transferring significant energy. Bullets striking wooden components made clean holes unless they directly hit a structural spar. The vital systems of the PO2, engine, fuel tank, and crew, occupied a remarkably small percentage of the aircraft's total volume. Even significant canvas tears had minimal effect on aerodynamics at such low speeds. Most critically, repairs to fabric required merely a canvas patch and glue, completed in 30 minutes, versus metal damage requiring welding and structural assessment taking hours or days. German pilots increasingly reported in frustration multiple confirmed hits. Target continued flight without apparent damage. During her 671st mission on April 7, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively. While bombing a German artillery position near Novorossiysk, her aircraft came under concentrated machine gun fire from a flak position. Post-mission inspection revealed 42 bullet holes in her aircraft, 17 in the upper wing alone, 14 through the fuselage, and 11 in the lower wing and tail surfaces. One bullet had passed through the cockpit area, missing her head by centimeters and continuing through her seat backrest. The ground crew, initially shocked at the damage, completed repairs in under 2 hours using canvas patches and carpenter's glue. "In their metal planes, I would be dead," Popova told newer pilots during briefing. "Their bullets find flesh by bouncing inside until they hit something vital. Our aircraft let bullets pass through like ghosts." This same aircraft would carry her through 73 more missions before being retired, contributing significantly to her remarkable total of 852 combat sorties. The Soviet mechanics had developed a saying, "Metal reflects bullets inward, canvas passes them outward." For Popova, this simple physical reality had kept her alive through hundreds of missions while 23 tons of her bombs reached their targets. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale. The Night Witches had discovered a tactic that rendered even the most sophisticated German detection systems useless. German searchlight and anti-aircraft artillery relied primarily on acoustic detection, sound-ranging equipment that triangulated engine noise for targeting. Their standard procedure followed a predictable sequence: hear approaching engines, activate searchlights to locate the target, direct anti-aircraft fire, and scramble fighters if necessary. The Night Witches exploited a simple counter to this entire system: silence. Their approach sequence had evolved from necessity into deadly efficiency. They would approach at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, allowing Germans to hear them coming and prepare defenses. Then, at approximately 3,000 feet from the target, they would cut their engines completely. The PO2 would then glide in total silence for 5 to 6 minutes, making only the soft rustling sound of wind through canvas wings. The physics of the PO2's glide ratio, approximately 1:10, meaning it lost 1 foot of altitude for every 10 feet of forward travel, allowed a 3,000-foot altitude to translate into 30,000 feet of gliding distance, or about 5.6 miles. At 60 mph glide speed, this provided nearly 6 minutes of completely silent approach. The psychological effect on German troops was profound. They would hear aircraft approaching, prepare for attack, then hear nothing while scanning empty skies, only to have bombs suddenly explode among them from aircraft they never saw or heard arrive. On the night of August 12, 1943, during her 11th sortie of a remarkable 18 that night, Nadezhda Popova used this silent approach to devastating effect. Her target was a German command post near Kiev that coordinated regional anti-aircraft defenses. Approaching at 7,500 feet, she allowed her engine to run at full power until German searchlights began sweeping the sky and anti-aircraft guns oriented toward the sound. At precisely 2,800 feet, she cut her engine completely. The sudden silence below created visible confusion. Searchlight beams swept frantically in widening circles, gliding directly over German positions, Popova could actually hear soldiers calling to each other. Where are they? Did they turn back? She released her bombs directly over the command bunker while Germans searched empty sky with their lights. The explosions illuminated their upturned faces as they realized too late what had happened. Popova restarted her engine only after clearing the target area by over a mile. She would repeat this silent approach on over 300 of her 852 missions, perfecting the timing to maximize German confusion. "We were ghosts they couldn't fight," she later told new pilots. "The silence terrified them more than our bombs." In silence, fear grows. By the time they heard our engines restart, we were already gone, and the damage was done. German reports increasingly mentioned spectral attacks and impossible silence before impact. German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter impressed with its specifications: 300 mph top speed, twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower, FUG-220 radar, encrypted radios, armor plating, and a specialized crew of 4. Each aircraft cost approximately 200,000 Reichsmarks, $80,000, required 3 months to build, and demanded highly skilled labor and precision manufacturing. Yet this impressive machine could manage only 1 to 2 sorties per night maximum. Maintenance between missions required 3 to 4 hours of systems checks, refueling, rearming, and crew rest. The 4-man crew experienced significant fatigue during high-stress night operations requiring complex coordination. The average Ju-88 night fighter career encompassed 40 to 60 missions before loss or crew rotation. Their survival rate averaged approximately 60%, with many losses attributed to weather, navigation errors, or mechanical failure rather than enemy action. The PO2, by contrast, presented primitive specifications: 94 mph maximum speed, single 100 horsepower engine, no radar, no radios, no armor, and a crew of 2. Each aircraft cost around 2,500 Reichsmarks, $5,000, and required only 3 weeks to build with minimal skilled labor. Yet this apparent disadvantage translated into remarkable operational efficiency. The PO2 could fly 8 to 18 sorties per night, with maintenance between missions taking just 7 minutes total, 4 minutes for refueling, and 3 minutes to reload bombs. Crew coordination consisted of 2 women who had flown together hundreds of times, communicating through practiced hand signals. The average Night Witch career encompassed 801,000 missions, with a survival rate of 96.8%. The stark paradox became increasingly apparent. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft yielded lower operational effectiveness, while simpler, cheaper aircraft delivered higher operational effectiveness. What Germans celebrated as technological advantage had transformed into a logistical disadvantage. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record during the summer of 1943. On the night of August 12-13, she completed 18 missions in a single night, starting at 2,200 hours and ending at 530 hours. Each complete cycle, flying to the target, dropping bombs, returning to base, refueling, reloading, and launching again, averaged just 25 minutes. The ground crew became so efficient that they could prepare her aircraft faster than she could walk from debriefing to cockpit. During those 18 missions, she dropped approximately 7 tons of bombs, targeting 6 ammunition dumps, 4 barracks facilities, 3 vehicle parks, 3 command posts, and 2 fuel depots. German casualties from her missions that night were estimated at 37 killed and 64 wounded. For comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilot had never completed more than 4 sorties in one night. By this point in the war, her remarkable efficiency was becoming legendary even among German soldiers, who had begun referring to specific Night Witch pilots by reputation. As she approached her 852 missions and 23 tons of bombs dropped, Popova was personally responsible for more sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters had completed. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in their resource allocation reports. German expenditure attempting to stop the Night Witches had reached staggering proportions. Anti-aircraft batteries had fired over 2 million rounds specifically targeting Night Witch aircraft. At an average cost of 50 Reichsmarks per anti-aircraft shell, this represented 100 million Reichsmarks, $40 million USD in ammunition alone. Fighter sorties dedicated to Night Witch interception exceeded 1,000 attempts, at an operational cost of 500 Reichsmarks per sortie. adding another 500,000 Reichsmarks to the bill. The Germans had deployed over 200 searchlight batteries specifically for night defense against these harassment raids, with 5,000-plus personnel assigned to counter the threat. Total German expenditure countering night witches had exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks, $50 million USD. By contrast, Soviet investment in the 588th Regiment consisted of approximately 40 PO-2 aircraft at $5,000 each, $200,000 total, bombs costing a fraction of the defensive ammunition expended against them, and approximately 80 pilots, Joschk navigators with minimal ground crew support, 150 personnel total. Total Soviet investment remained under $2 million USD for the entire regiment. The cost ratio had become absurd. Germans were spending 25 Reichsmarks trying to stop every 1 Reichsmark the Soviets invested in the night witches. Most damning of all, German fighters had achieved 0 confirmed kills against night witch aircraft. The result was perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency. If German anti-aircraft batteries fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her per mission, her 852 missions had drawn 852,000 rounds of anti-aircraft fire. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, Germans had spent approximately 42.6 million Reichsmarks, $17 million USD, trying to kill 1 woman. The result, she survived. Her bombs had destroyed an estimated 200-plus vehicles, 45 ammunition dumps, 70 fuel depots, 25 command posts, and inflicted approximately 300 casualties. The value of German material destroyed through her missions alone was conservatively estimated at 30 million Reichsmarks. For perspective, the average USAAF bomber crew rotated home after 25 missions. Considering this a complete tour of duty, Popova had completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty. She represented more combat sorties than 3 entire squadrons of German night fighters combined. Her 852 missions and 23 tons of bombs made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal, achieving a return on investment that military economists could scarcely believe. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets, and Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation. On November 8, 1943, near Melitopol, a PO-2 was struck by concentrated anti-aircraft fire while returning from a bombing mission. The aircraft crash-landed in a field 2 kilometers behind German lines. By dawn, a Wehrmacht patrol had located the wreckage and approached to confirm the kill and retrieve any intelligence materials. Feldwebel Kurt Wagner led the 4-man patrol that made the discovery. The aircraft had broken apart on impact, with the engine section partially buried in soft earth. The cockpit area remained largely intact. As Wagner approached, he expected to find the body of a Soviet pilot, anticipating useful documents and perhaps even a map of their airfield location. What he found instead changed the entire understanding of the night harassment campaign that had plagued German forces for more than a year. Initial inspection revealed a small-framed pilot, Wagner reported. I presumed it was a young boy, perhaps 16 or 17. When we removed the leather helmet to check for identification papers, we discovered unmistakably that the pilot was female, approximately 20 years of age. The patrol's initial confusion turned to disbelief. They photographed the scene and collected all documents from the flight suit: identification papers for Senior Lieutenant Elena Makarova, a flight log recording 311 completed night missions, and a handwritten letter addressed to a female navigator mentioned with feminine pronouns. Wagner's report was initially met with skepticism by his company commander, who assumed the documents were Soviet propaganda or that the woman was perhaps a ferry pilot delivering the aircraft. 4 days later, however, another PO-2 was shot down 15 kilometers away. The pilot had bailed out but was captured. She was Lieutenant Sofia Nikolaeva, who confirmed under interrogation that she served in an all-female bomber regiment. German intelligence suddenly connected scattered reports from the previous year that had been dismissed as translation errors or propaganda. Hauptmann Gerhard Miller, the intelligence officer who collated these reports, assembled the evidence methodically. There exists a Soviet air unit designated 588th Night Bomber Regiment composed entirely of female personnel, his report stated. Documented evidence confirms these are combat pilots, not transport or ferry personnel. Flight logs recovered show multiple combat sorties nightly against Wehrmacht positions. Prisoner interrogation confirms gender composition of unit and operational history since May 1942. The report traveled rapidly up the chain of command. Battalion commanders initially dismissed it, requesting verification. Division headquarters demanded photographic evidence and interrogation transcripts. By early December 1943, the evidence had reached Army Group South headquarters, where General Ewald von Kleist personally reviewed the materials. The verification was irrefutable. Women were flying the wooden biplanes that had harassed German positions for 18 months, evaded fighter interception, and consumed millions of Reichsmarks in defensive expenditure. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure. During a high-level briefing at Army Group headquarters on December 14th, the intelligence was presented to assembled staff officers. Lieutenant Colonel Werner Schmidt of Luftwaffe Liaison opened with disbelief. "These documents must be Soviet deception. Women cannot fly combat missions in such numbers." General von Kleist interrupted. "The evidence is verified through multiple sources. We must address the operational reality." The psychological impact rippled through German ranks. Many officers initially refused to accept the evidence, demanding further confirmation. The revelation struck at the core of Wehrmacht masculine pride. Elite Luftwaffe pilots who had failed to intercept the Night Witches now faced the additional humiliation of having been outmaneuvered by women in obsolete aircraft. The propaganda implications were immediately recognized as potentially devastating. How could the Wehrmacht explain to the German public that Soviet women were successfully bombing German positions night after night? The ideological conflict was equally troubling. Nazi doctrine emphasized women's roles as mothers and homemakers, not combat pilots. If Soviet women could successfully operate combat aircraft, what other assumptions about German superiority might be questioned? Practical concerns soon overshadowed ideological ones. Frontline commanders needed solutions, not philosophical debates. Operational Order 4427, issued December 22, 1943, revealed the official response. All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender. This directive is issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale. The order, signed by General Zeitzler, Chief of Staff of the Army High Command, effectively suppressed official acknowledgement of female pilots. Reactions varied across ranks. Some Luftwaffe pilots reportedly requested transfers rather than admit being outmaneuvered by women. Others focused entirely on the tactical threat, refusing to acknowledge gender as relevant. Among frontline infantry, however, the reality was impossible to ignore. The nickname Nachthexen, Night Witches, spread rapidly through German lines despite official discouragement. Some units began requesting specific anti-Night Witch resources, while others developed a grudging respect for their tormentors. While German command struggled with the revelation, Nadezhda Popova continued her missions without pause. The night Germans discovered the 588th Regiment's composition, she was flying her 687th mission, targeting a German ammunition depot near Zaporozhye. She remained unconcerned whether the enemy knew her gender. By the time von Kleist viewed the intelligence reports, Popova had already completed 704 of her eventual 852 missions. The discovery period coincided with her most intensive operational tempo, 14 missions in a single night on December 17, 1943, during which she destroyed 2 fuel dumps and damaged a railway junction critical for German resupply. "We didn't fly to make history or prove women could fight," she told new pilots joining her squadron. "We flew because fascists had invaded our homeland. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs. The discovery changed nothing operationally. The Night Witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners that revealed the true impact of the Night Witches on German operations and morale. Between 1945 and 1946, hundreds of German officers and enlisted men were questioned about their Eastern Front experiences, with specific inquiries about night operations. When asked about the Nachthexen, interrogators noted consistent patterns in responses, regardless of the prisoner's rank or unit. Even hardened SS officers showed visible discomfort when discussing the topic. Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller, a Ju-88 night fighter pilot captured near Prague in May 1945, provided particularly revealing testimony. We received orders to intercept these aircraft in September 1943. Command didn't tell us they were women. We only learned after being captured. I attempted interception 14 times. 14 failures. The aircraft were too slow for engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I tried to match their speed. It was professionally humiliating. You train for years to master a complex aircraft. You face British Lancaster bombers successfully. You understand air combat. Then a wooden biplane makes you look foolish. When I learned they were women, transcript notes pause, I had no words. We couldn't catch them because physics wouldn't let us. Gender was irrelevant. They had beaten the laws of aerodynamics itself. Hauptmann Walter Fischer, who commanded an anti-aircraft battery in eastern Ukraine, offered similar insights. My battery fired an estimated 22,000 rounds at these aircraft between August 1942 and January 1944. We achieved perhaps 4 confirmed hits across 17 months. They would approach with engines loud. We would prepare. Then, silence. We would fire at where we thought they were, but we were shooting at ghosts. The sound would return after bombs exploded. Psychological effect on my men was severe. We feared the silence more than the bombs. Learning they were women only added to the sense that we had underestimated our enemy at every level. Across hundreds of testimonies, clear patterns emerged. Prisoners consistently mentioned the psychological impact of the silence before attacks. Luftwaffe personnel repeatedly described failed interceptions due to the speed differential. Almost all expressed shock upon learning the gender of the pilots, though their rationalizations varied. Some insisted Soviet propaganda had exaggerated female involvement, while others admitted it made no difference to operational effectiveness. Many used variations of the phrase, "we couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed." Several mentioned specific night witches by reputation or aircraft markings, indicating these women had become recognized adversaries rather than anonymous threats. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without knowing her name. Lieutenant Klaus Hoffmann of the 79th Infantry Division recalled, "There was one aircraft we learned to recognize. Had distinctive red star marking on the tail and repair patches along the left wing. We began calling it the persistent one, because it would appear over our position 3 or 4 nights consecutively, then disappear for a week, then return." I witnessed this aircraft's attack 7 times personally. On April 3, 1944, it destroyed our fuel depot. On April 18th, it hit our field hospital, despite its Red Cross markings. After surrender, I learned from Soviet records this was likely Lieutenant Popova. She had flown over 800 missions by war's end. We never came close to shooting her down. She seemed to know our defenses better than we did. Popova herself was aware that Germans were capturing her comrades. 2 navigators from her squadron had been taken prisoner in early 1944. She responded by increasing her operational tempo, flying 147 missions in the 3 months following their capture. As the Soviets advanced westward, her mission count continued climbing toward the 852 that would become her final tally. The 23 tons of bombs she delivered throughout the war became documented not just in Soviet records, but in German testimonies, where officers would reference the destruction without knowing the identity of the pilot responsible. Our job was to torment them without respite, she reflected after the war. Every night they didn't sleep, every supply they couldn't move, every position they couldn't defend properly the next day. That was our victory. Whether they respected us or feared us or were humiliated by us was their concern. Our concern was making them pay for what they had done to our homeland. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. Her 852 combat missions represented an achievement unparalleled in aviation history. Over 3 years of continuous operations, she had accumulated approximately 1,104 flight hours in combat conditions, dropping 23 tons of bombs on German positions. From her first sortie in May 1942 to her final mission in May 1945, Popova flew in conditions ranging from the blistering summer heat of the Caucasus to the -40-degree winters of Ukraine and Belarus. Most remarkable of all, despite hundreds of close calls, she was never shot down. Her decorations reflected this extraordinary record: Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor, 3 orders of the Red Banner, the Order of the Red Star, and numerous campaign medals. The 852 missions she completed exceeded not just individual German aces, but entire fighter squadrons. While the most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilots typically recorded between 40-60 missions in their careers, Popova averaged 28 missions per month for over 3 years. She flew during blizzards when German aircraft remained grounded. She continued missions despite suffering frostbite that left permanent scars on her face and hands. On at least 3 documented occasions, she flew with injuries sustained from anti-aircraft fire fragments. The physical toll was matched only by the psychological burden. Each night, sortie required perfect concentration despite crushing fatigue. The open cockpit exposed her to temperatures that could freeze exposed skin within minutes. Engine noise at close range for thousands of hours permanently damaged her hearing. The regiment lost 32 of its members during the war. Each death a friend and comrade she had trained with, lived with, and fought alongside. Yet each night, she returned to the air, knowing the odds accumulated against survival with each additional mission. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The United States Army Air Forces rotated bomber crews home after 25 missions, considering this a complete tour of duty, with its psychological and physical limits reached. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours. The average Soviet male bomber pilot flew between 150-300 missions during the entire war. The most decorated German night fighter, Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, achieved 121 aerial victories but flew fewer than 200 combat sorties. Even among the night witches, where the regiment average approached 500-600 missions per pilot, Popova exceeded her sisters-in-arms by several hundred flights. The scale of her individual contribution becomes clearer through simple calculation. Her 852 missions represented more sorties than some entire Soviet bomber squadrons combined. If each mission averaged 2 hours from takeoff to landing, she spent 71 complete days, over 2 months, in the air, while exposed to enemy fire. The 23 tons of bombs she delivered personally destroyed an estimated 30 ammunition dumps, 75 fuel depots, 20 command posts, and 350-plus vehicles. German casualties from her missions alone were conservatively estimated at 1,500. Most tellingly, if German forces fired an average of 1,000 anti-aircraft rounds per night witch mission, they expended over 850,000 rounds attempting to shoot down a single woman flying an aircraft that cost less than one of their heavy tanks. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history. And she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to deploy women in combat roles. Over 3 years of operations, the regiment completed more than 24,000 combat sorties, dropping over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions. Their operations killed or wounded an estimated 5,000 German personnel and destroyed hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, and countless supply depots and command centers. From their first missions in May 1942 until the final day of the war, the Night Witches maintained continuous operations across the Eastern Front, advancing westward with Soviet forces. Most remarkably, the regiment achieved this while suffering comparatively minimal losses. Of approximately 80 female personnel who served in the unit, 32 were killed, giving them a 60% survival rate, far exceeding the 40-60% survival rate of conventional Soviet bomber units. The cost-effectiveness calculations were equally striking. The entire regiment, including aircraft, maintenance, and personnel, cost the Soviet Union approximately $2 million in 1940s USD, while inflicting damage conservatively valued at $50+ million. The operational paradox that had confounded German commanders was validated by final statistics. The cheapest aircraft flown by the most unsuitable pilots had achieved the highest effectiveness per ruble invested. German expenditure countering the Night Witches exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks in anti-aircraft ammunition, fighter sorties, searchlight batteries, and personnel. This created a staggering cost ratio. For every ruble Soviets invested in the Night Witches, Germans spent 60 trying to stop them. Most tellingly of all, despite thousands of interception attempts, German fighters achieved 0 confirmed aerial kills of Night Witch aircraft. Almost all losses came from ground fire, not air combat, but numbers alone don't capture the strategic value. The psychological warfare aspect, German troops' degraded morale and sleep deprivation, contributed to daytime Soviet advances. More than 5,000 German soldiers were tied down in air defense roles specifically to counter night harassment raids, removing them from frontline duties. Supply lines were consistently disrupted, forcing longer and more vulnerable routes for German logistics. The propaganda value proved immense, demonstrating that Soviet women could fight effectively and boosting civilian morale across the USSR. Perhaps most importantly, the Night Witches exposed fundamental flaws in German intelligence assessment and military doctrine. They provided a model of asymmetric warfare that would influence military thinking for decades, using an enemy's strengths against them, exploiting overlooked weaknesses, and achieving strategic impact with minimal resources. Marshal Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The Night Witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions embodied this principle. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat. Her immediate post-war recognition was considerable, awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, participating in victory parades, and speaking to Soviet citizens about her experiences. Yet, like many veterans, she struggled with the transition. The constant adrenaline of combat missions, the tight-knit community of her regiment, and the clear purpose of war had all suddenly vanished. Popova continued in aviation, working as a test pilot for several years before becoming a flight instructor. She married another decorated pilot, Semyon Kharlamov, and they had one son. Unlike some veterans who refused to discuss their wartime experiences, Popova spoke openly about the Night Witches, maintaining close relationships with surviving squadron mates through annual reunions. She advocated for greater recognition of women's contributions during the war, giving interviews and speaking at military academies. Soviet recognition of the Night Witches fluctuated with the political climate. During Stalin's later years, many war heroes were deliberately downplayed if they had achieved fame independent of his direct leadership. After Stalin's death, more comprehensive accounts began appearing in Soviet military histories. Popova received multiple additional honors in the post-war decades, including the Order of Lenin. When she died in 2013 at age 91, she was buried with full military honors in Moscow's Novodevichy Cemetery, the final resting place of Soviet heroes. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West. Cold War tensions meant their story was either suppressed entirely or dismissed as Soviet propaganda in Western military circles. It wasn't until the glasnost period of the late 1980s that more accurate accounts began emerging. The 1990s brought access to previously classified Soviet archives, allowing Western historians to document and verify the Night Witches' achievements. German POW testimonies, now freely available, validated Soviet accounts that had once been questioned. By the 2000s, books and documentaries began bringing their story to wider Western audiences. Museums in Russia prominently feature the 588th Regiment, including the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow and the Russian Air Force Museum at Monino. Monuments have been erected in several cities where the regiment was based during the war. Schools and streets bear the names of regiment members throughout Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Nadezhda Popova specifically has been featured in historical exhibitions, documentaries, and books, detailing her remarkable 852 missions and 23 tons of bombs delivered. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering insights that remain relevant decades later. Their experience demonstrates how asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority, a lesson repeated in conflicts throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries. They proved that psychological impact often exceeds physical damage, as German troops feared the Night Witches out of proportion to their numerical strength. Their innovations showed that creativity often matters more than resources, allowing them to achieve what German engineers had calculated was impossible. Perhaps most importantly, they exposed the danger of underestimation. German assumptions about gender and aircraft primitiveness created a blind spot that persisted long after evidence contradicted it. The Germans' perceived strengths, sophisticated aircraft, powerful engines, advanced detection systems, became weaknesses when confronted with tactics specifically designed to exploit them. What they dismissed as a weakness, the POWs' slow speed, became the very characteristic that made it untouchable. The physical resilience required for 852 missions over 3 years demonstrates extraordinary determination. Each mission carried significant probability of death, yet Popova continued night after night through winter and summer, injured and exhausted. The Night Witches also proved that sometimes simple designs outperform complex ones. Canvas-absorbed bullets that would have ricocheted fatally inside metal aircraft. Their silent gliding technique showed how constraints can force innovation that sophisticated technology might never consider. On May 2, 1945, when Nadezhda Popova climbed into her POW for the 852nd time, she represented the complete refutation of everything German engineers and officers had dismissed as impossible. From that first Luftwaffe briefing where officers laughed at women in crop dusters, through thousands of missions where physics itself seemed to bend to her will, to the final statistics that defied conventional military analysis, she had proven that the most dangerous weapon in warfare isn't the most advanced. It's the one your enemy refuses to take seriously. The Night Witches had turned disadvantages into strengths, obsolete into untouchable, and harassment into psychological warfare. In her wooden biplane, flying below stall speed, Nadezhda Popova didn't just drop 23 tons of bombs. She dropped the weight of assumption that technology alone determines victory, and that some are unsuited for war's demands. The greatest miscalculation the Germans made wasn't about aircraft specifications or physics. It was about human determination.